before constitutional jurisprudence. His work's been quoted in actually two different presidential impeachment trials, which sounds funny to say.
They were close.
That's historic. He's also testified before Congress. He advises both federal and state lawmakers. He regularly appears on NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox News, the BBC. He commentates on NPR quite a bit. If you still listen to radio. He's published, I can't tell you how many different law review articles, commentaries that get published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. He's actually published recently, I thought, a very compelling amicus brief in an important
with
case.
Extremely talented local counsel, I'd add.
A good filing, but I'll let you get into that.
Sure, why not?
He's published a couple of different books, 3 books to be exact. One, An Introduction to Constitutional Law, was a top 5 bestseller on Amazon. He is previously served as the president, maybe still as president, of the Harlan Institute.
Mm-hmm.
He's founded the Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league, which I feel like I have to join now.
You should.
He's a frequent blogger for the Volkov conspiracy. After graduating from law school, he had 2 federal clerkships that are worthy of note. One under Judge Kim Gibson of the United States District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and another for the United States District Court, 6th Circuit, under Judge Danny Julian Boggs. If y'all don't mind, please help me welcome Professor Plank.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I was last here about 7 years ago. It's good to be back in Florida this chapter. Oh, I've been in Florida, but not this chapter since about 2018 or so. President Trump has a way of making obscure con law great again. I don't know how he does it. Consistently, he takes these random issues that no one cares about and puts them at the front. So there was emoluments. There's now the special counsel. And of course, we have insurrection. Now, who here had ever even heard of the insurrection clause before 2021? No one even heard of it. Okay, so it's in the Constitution. I promise you it's there. It was passed in 1868 in the wake of the Civil War. It's a jumble of text. Let's just sort of break down what it actually says. I'm taking the elements out of order. First off, it's designed to disqualify certain people from holding certain offices because they engaged in insurrection. Actually, there's music next door. If they can maybe kill the music next door. Oh, thanks. All right, so first off, who does it apply to? Not everyone. Okay, so if you are a private citizen, you can engage in all the insurrection you want, and I don't recommend it, but you could. And Section 3 says nothing about you. It applies to a person. Oh, my laser dude doesn't work in this specialty, but it's my finger. An oath as a member of Congress, as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or an executive or judicial officer of any state. So, judge in the room, you're covered. Okay? If you work for the governor, you're probably covered. If you're a member of the Congress, you're probably covered. Member of state legislature, you're covered. But there's a position here that's not listed. The president, not listed. Vice president, not listed. Okay. Step 2. If you have one of these offices, what can you not do? You cannot engage in insurrection against the United States. Okay. What's an insurrection? Well, in 1868, it was a civil war. We all knew that was an insurrection. There was no doubt. Was January 6th an insurrection? I'll get to that later. Okay. Number 3. So if you have one of those covered offices and then you engage in insurrection, you cannot hold other offices. And it lists a bunch of them. You can't be a senator, representative, elector of president, or hold any office, civil, military, under the United States. Now, what's not listed there? You might notice. President's not listed there. You have electors, but not president. Vice president's not listed. Also, state legislatures are not listed. So wait a minute. State legislatures are listed here, but not there. So if you engage in insurrection, go to Tallahassee. Hold office as much as you want because you're not barred. You see, these provisions don't disqualify everyone holding every office. It lists only certain positions. So shortly after January 6th, I mean, that evening, I had this epiphany. I'm like, wait a minute. They're going to try and get him on Section 3. I actually was on TV that evening saying this is going to be an issue. right? So before the dust even settled, we knew this would happen. And as Trump started applying to be on the ballot in many states, voters said, aha, Trump, you are disqualified. You cannot be president. And initially, most courts rejected this issue altogether. But then Colorado, the Mile High State, said, no, we're going to take Trump off the ballot because that's what democracy requires, right? The key to democracy means you can't vote for your candidate. That's what democracy means. Just we're all on the same page here. And so there were four primary, I'll call the Trump questions. So first off, can a state court disqualify a president, the federal official, from the ballot? That's question number one. But question number two is, was Trump even subject to Section 3? Right? Again, if you go back, president's not listed here. The only way that Trump is covered by Section 3 would be if he holds an office, if he's an officer of the United States. Again, I can't reach officer of the United States. That's the only way Trump's covered. Is the president an officer of the United States? Okay. Another question, did Trump engage in insurrection? Was January 6th even an insurrection? He was not at the Capitol. He was a couple miles away. Did he engage in insurrection? And the final question, is he disqualified from holding the presidency? Again, this only applies to an office under the United States, right? Under the United States. If Trump is on office under the United States, so if the president's on office under the United States, they can't disqualify him. All right, so these are the four questions. Passover in a couple weeks, we have four questions lined up. These are the four questions for the case. To put this, thank you for my Jewish friends. I'm in Florida. My goodness, I hope we have some here. So there are four legal questions. First off, does Section 3 require federal enforcement legislation? Right? Do you need a federal statute to enforce this? The second question, is the president an officer of the United States? The third question, were the events of January 6th an insurrection? And the fourth question, is the presidency an office under the United States? Now, again, no one cared about any of these questions before January 6th. They just didn't matter because it was almost absurd. Like, who would even think this would be relevant in our modern era? Well, I thought about it, and my colleague has as well. So I do a lot of work with Seth Barrett-Tillman. He's a law professor in Ireland. He's a genius of high level, and I don't give that praise very lightly. But since about 2008, he's been writing a series of articles that the president is not an officer of the United States. The president is not an office under the United States. That these phrases refer to appointed positions and not elected positions. I mean, who cares, right? When Tillman started writing, these were obscure questions that didn't matter, which is why he wrote about them. Now, I was persuaded by Tillman in around 2013, so I was Tillmanized, one might say, right? Seth persuaded me that this phrase in the Constitution refers to appointed positions. There's a lot of evidence. The Appointments Clause, the president appoints the officers of the United States. The president commissions the officers of the United States. The officers of the United States can be impeached. These are all appointed positions. I was not alone in giving praise to Seth. A good friend at the University of Chicago, Will Bode, wrote this very flattering praise of Seth. And he says that Seth's work makes sense out of patterns that most of us never even saw. It brings order out of chaos. So what Tillman had going for him was a theory of how to make all the language in the Constitution fit together. That this phrase, officer of the United States and office under the United States, means appointed and not elected. Now again, none of this mattered until Trump made obscure common law great again. As you might recall, he owned the Trump International Hotel, which is Washington, D.C. It was very popular for a time, and a lot of foreign governments started staying there and eating there and renting rooms and holding parties. And it was argued that these foreign governments were engaging in unconstitutional activity. They were engaging in a violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. Remember this one? Now, who had ever heard of the Emoluments Clause before Trump? I see no hands. Okay, one. Thank you. At least two people, okay? Thank you. It'll be on the pop quiz later, right? The Foreign Emoluments Clause says that certain people in the government cannot accept foreign presence, emoluments, offices of any kind from a foreign state. Now, what's an emolument? In our view, it's basically compensation for an office, right? When you do something for an office, it's your compensation, not the salary. But people say, no. Emoluments means any profit, any gain whatsoever. We think that's wrong. But there's another issue. The Foreign Emoluments Clause applies to who? A person holding an office under the United States. There's that language again. This language appears throughout the Constitution. In our view, this language only refers to a person holding an appointed office. An appointed office. Why does this matter? Trump was elected. And in Tillman's view, and in my view, the Foreign Emoluments Clause says nothing at all about the president. So from 2017 until 2021, we filed a series of amicus briefs in lots of courts, in Maryland, in DC, in New York, making the same argument that this phrase, office under the United States, means appointed and elected. Therefore, Trump is not subject to this provision. Now, what's curious is that DOJ didn't disagree with us. They also didn't agree with us. They said, it's a very weird brief, they said, we assume that the president is subject to this clause, but they didn't accept that position. So we actually sort of moved DOJ off their prior position. So go Josh, right? We had evidence on our side, right? George Washington, right? We haven't canceled him yet, right? George Washington was our first president. Those who took American history recently, right? He was our first president, and he accepted gifts from foreign countries. Who went to Mount Vernon? Anyone go to Mount Vernon? You've seen these items at Mount Vernon. It's on the tour. This is a famous portrait given by the King of France. This is a very famous key to the Bastille, given by Marquis de Lafayette. If you watch Hamilton show, you know what that is, right? Washington did not only accept these gifts, he put them on display in his home. He kept them after he left office. You have a president, the first president, accepting foreign gifts. That's some evidence that maybe Washington thought he was not subject to this provision. Good enough for Washington, it's good enough for Trump. Same for our third president, Thomas Jefferson, accepted gifts from foreign nations. You ever go to Monticello, you'll see there's a bust of the Russian Tsar, and these are trinkets from the Indian tribes, Lewis and Clark on the Great Expedition, right? These were gifts from a foreign sovereign nation. As Justice Gorsuch tells us, the Indians were foreign governments, right? These are sovereign nations. So you have Washington. You have Jefferson accepting the gifts from foreign countries. That's some good evidence. There's more evidence. Alexander Hamilton, yes, Hamilton himself. The Senate asked him for a list of all the people holding office under the United States. What did Hamilton do? He gave a list of all the appointed positions. He did not include the president on that list. So we have Washington. We got Jefferson. We got Hamilton. That's pretty good, right? We've got three of those guys. Those are pretty important people. But you know what? People like saying that we're crazy. And people like making up stuff about us. It happens all the time. So a bunch of historians came out in an amicus brief. They said, you misled the court. This is great. They said, Hamilton actually listed the president in this document. You guys messed up. And they said, we went to the archives. We found the original document that Hamilton signed, and he added the president. But guess what? We knew about that. And we were right. The document they cited was made 20 years after Hamilton died. Someone just wrote the name Alexander Hamilton as a copy, as a scrivener. This was doctored decades after his death. The original, which is also in the archive, supports our document. So the historians, they apologized. We were the first of many. They said, I'm sorry, we were wrong. We look forward to debating Professor Blackman until in the future. They never actually did. So I give you this as history. People have a history of saying that we are crazy, that we mislead courts, that we're frivolous. And every time they do it, it's bad for them because they have to withdraw and apologize and pretend it never happened. We'll get to that again in a few minutes. Okay. So the emoluments cases went up and down the courts. Eventually, they got to the Supreme Court in October of 2020, right before the election. And wouldn't you know it, Trump lost the election. He lost the election. Just be everyone's on the same page. He lost the election. Okay? He lost the election. Let's be clear. And the case became moot, right? Because he's not in office anymore. The court said, just dismiss his moot, make this case go away. So we thought, okay, we're done. We're done with this officer stuff, right? Who cares about emoluments? It's over. Biden's president. We don't care anymore, right? Wrong. What happened? January the 6th. And as I was watching the events unfold on TV, as I'm sure you all were all seeing, we're not done with this officer stuff. Why? Because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to Trump only if he held an officer of the United States. The same issue we've been litigating would become immediately irrelevant. Was Trump covered by Section 3? I sometimes feel like I'm trapped in the movie Groundhog Day, which is a classic for my Western Pennsylvania friend, right? I'm trapped in Punxsutawney, where no matter how hard I try, I can't get away from the officer stuff. It keeps drawing me in. And Michael mentioned it. I just filed an amicus brief in the Southern District of Florida about 2 weeks ago, arguing that Jack Smith is not an officer of the United States, that the special counsel is not appointed properly. So you cannot escape this officer stuff. It's this trap. So on January 6th, we started writing. And Seth and I quickly wrote an article. Michael said we write a lot. We do. And one of the articles was arguing that the president is not an officer of the United States. We knew this litigation was coming. We published this in 2021. We were really quick on this one. We were just ready for it. But you know what? No one really cared because people thought, oh, Trump will never get the nomination. You're right. Oh, he'll be indicted. That's the end of Trump, right? The walls are closing in. No, nothing ever stops the guy, right? He's indestructible. They don't give a Trump Bible, by the way. I haven't picked one of those up yet. It actually has a constitution in it, which might be useful. But the guy can't be stopped. So he got the nomination, and as soon as he got the nomination, it became clear he'll be on the ballot. They need to stop him. So for a time, we were the only scholars who wrote about this. But okay, that's pretty good. We were an article. People will cite us. That's great. Maybe judges will think it's persuasive. We thought there's no way in heck that any judge will take Trump off the ballot. We just thought it just will not happen. But then, the saviors, right? Two law professors, both very good friends of mine, Will Bode and Mike Paulson, come out. And these are card-carrying Federal Society members. Mike clerked for, did he clerk for Scalia? I can't remember. He very influential person in the conservative movement. Will Bode clerked for Chief Justice Roberts, very well regarded. And they came out with the New York Times. I mean, most of the time when you write an article, it doesn't get announced in the New York Times, but they did. Why? Because they were conservatives, or at least people who are affiliated with conservatives, who argued against Trump. And what I've learned is the easiest way for a conservative to get attention is to become a critic of conservatives, right? It just makes you immediately loved. There's just this shower of attention and affection that warms you. I've never actually felt this hug, but I've heard about it. I usually get the opposite. I get the go away, Blackman, right? But when you write something against Trump from the right, you are loved. And the New York Times says, 2 law professors active in the FedSoc. This is not a FedSoc article, but they take the affiliation as the headline. Wrote that original meaning disqualifies Trump from office. This New York Times article blew up. The article is downloaded about 100,000 times, which is a stunning number of people to actually read an article, let alone view it. And they argue that all the evidence points in the direction that Trump must be disqualified. They had no doubt. How long have they been researching this topic? About a year. That's not a lot. This is a provision that has been dead for 150 years, on which there's not much law. And the 2 law professors spent about a year on it, and they know everything about it. I think as a pathology, my field, academia, has a lack of humility. I mean that sincerely. Humility is very important. You have to know what you know and recognize what you don't know. And to say with absolute certainty that Trump's disqualified, I think reeks of hubris. So we learn nothing else from me tonight. Just be humble. It's a good lesson. I try to teach it to my kids. Be humble always. But they did the opposite of humility. Now, our argument is that Trump is not even covered by Section 3. He doesn't hold one of the required offices. So what did Bode and Paulson say about me and Seth? This is, again, law professors saying that we're crazy. It happens so much I'm immune to it. They said, ready? The Blackman-Tillman approach is hidden meaning hermeneutics. I don't know what that even means. That renders Section 3 a secret code loaded with hidden meanings. Here's my favorite part. Discernible only by a select priesthood of Illuminati. So you have 2 Jews or Illuminati priests. Go figure that one out, right? And the irony is that Paulson's a Catholic. He teaches at a Catholic law school, homie Illuminati. None of this makes sense, right? But their point is that we have no evidence, that we have no arguments, that there's no argument in favor. There's a secret code that no one even knows about. I can give you a stack of papers this high in support of us, but They didn't address that. They said they're crazy. This is what happens with academic discourse. When there's an argument that you can't actually refute, you just call the people crazy. Call them nuts. You call them priests of Illuminati cult. I don't even know what hidden meaning hermeneutic, I don't know what that even means. It sounds nice, but it's meaningless words. I will give you all secret decoder rings later. It comes in a box of Cracker Jacks, right? Remember those, right? And you'll be able to use that to read my article. It's written, if you hold up to the sun and just, during the eclipse, right? During the eclipse, the article just light up. You'll get an eclipse in Florida. That sucks. We have in Texas all over the place. We're going to go to the eclipse. I'm very excited. Okay. But Akhil Amar, who was professor to Bode and was a roommate of Paulson, also talked about our argument on his podcast, which I encourage you not to listen to. It's not a good use of anyone's time. If you do, that's fine. I don't begrudge you, but I can't listen to it. But he said, let me just read to you. I'll do my Akhil voice. Let me be clear. This is a genuinely stupid argument on the merits. I'm going to demolish it. It's embarrassing. This is very wrong. It's silly. It's so silly. And I was laughing because I actually couldn't resist to even hear these formulations elicit laughter from me. This is what Akhil says about us. This is how academics talk. Again, humility is very important. We don't really know what Section 3 means. Let's be completely honest. This was a provision that's been dead for 150 years. The people who knew what this meant are long dead, and they didn't write down everything they knew. We don't have a lot of decisions about it. We just don't have law. And your professors, they said, we will recover an entire general field of law based on our offices in Ivy League law schools. It smacks of hubris. So then something crazy happened. So we put an amicus brief into the Colorado trial court, or we put in amicus brief for the Colorado trial court. Actually, we didn't do an amicus brief in the trial court, I'm sorry. But we wrote about this at length. And the Trump lawyers, to their credit, adopted our argument. The Trump lawyers said that, yes, the president is not an officer of the United States. And what do you think happened? I have some state judges here. State judges, I think, get a bum rap. The trial judge here was a Democratic appointee in Denver. She's not a FedSoc member. You know what she agreed with? Me. She said the president's not an officer of the United States. And she said this is a matter of simple text. If a trial judge in Denver, a Democratic appointee, can see this is not Illuminati cult stuff. And she walked through and said, if you look at all the clauses in the Constitution where they refer to the officers of the United States, it's always appointed. The Appointments Clause, Commissions Clause, Impeachment Clause, and so on. Okay? But then the case was appealed to the Supreme Court of the state. Again, the Trump lawyers used our arguments at length. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled by 4-3 vote that Trump is disqualified. A 4-3 vote in a blue state. They couldn't even get a solid majority in their own court. And what's interesting is who were the 4 judges that knocked Trump off the ballot? They all went to Ivy League law schools. Who are the judges that kept Trump on the ballot? They went to UC Boulder, University of Denver. I should say real people. Sorry, if any Ivy League people, I'm sorry, you're human beings, you exist. But people who actually went to a normal law school see the world differently than those of the Ivy League. This entire case was a manifestation of an Ivy League fantasy that will go to court and we'll get judges to take Trump off the ballot and it'll just be awesome. That's what democracy demands. That the way to save a republic is to prevent people from voting for a candidate. Just say it out loud. Say how insane it is. But this is what they honestly think. That you are too stupid to know who to vote for. That you need to have judges take your ballot away from you. That's what they think. They believe that sincerely. All this about voting rights and disenfranchisement. If you have, one less day of early voting, it's Jim Crow. Again, these arguments are advanced to take the vote away. And the Colorado Supreme Court cited none of our arguments. They said, oh, this is just crazy. This is insane. Of course, the president's covered. Why would the framers do this? And so on. Okay? So again, 4-3 decision. It goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court put this on what we can call the rocket docket. It went very quickly. Why? Super Tuesday was coming up in March. This case got to the court in January. They had to decide this by Super Tuesday. Why? Colorado had an election. People had to know, will my vote be counted? Am I going to cast my vote for a candidate who's going to be disqualified? So the court granted review. They put on a super accelerated argument schedule. And everything went quickly. So Seth and I filed an amicus brief with our co-counsel at the Supreme Court, and we made two primary arguments. The first argument I've not mentioned, I'll mention here now. We don't have much law on Section 3, but we do have one opinion. It's a really important one. Within a year of the 14th Amendment's ratification, Chief Justice Salmon Chase was riding circuit. He was sitting in a federal court in Virginia. And he decided a case called Griffin's case. It's a very complex case. I don't have time to describe it. But the upshot is that Chase said Section 3 can only be enforced by Congress, that Congress has to act, that it's indispensable for Congress to act. Now, it wasn't about election law. It was about a federal habeas case. It's complex. But Chase said that Section 3 is indispensable. I'm sorry, that federal legislation is indispensable. What happened after Griffin's case was decided? Congress enacts enforcement legislation. They responded to what Chase said. No one came out and said, Chase is wrong, right? We shouldn't do this. The response was, okay, let's enact some laws. Could you imagine, within a year of ratification, the Chief Justice of the United States tells us what this opinion means? That's good evidence, right? But what did Bowden Paulson say about Chase? That he was wrong, that he was wacko, that he was crazy. That was appalling. They compared Chase to Roger Taney and Dred Scott. They think we're crazy. They compared the leading abolitionist lawyer to Roger Brooks Taney. My goodness. So Seth and I, among other things, we rehabilitated Salmon Chase. We made Chase great again, if you will, right? We said this was a good lawyer who wrote an opinion under tough conditions that was accepted. This formed the backdrop of which we understand Section 3. What did the Colorado Supreme Court say? Chase was just a circuit court decision. It's not binding on us, so on. Can you imagine any other context? But again, this was always an Ivy League fantasy from the get-go. This was a hallucination in the minds of some very smart people, that this would actually be a good idea. We also made our officer argument. And we say, look, we get it, right? Why would the framers exclude the president from Section 3? They weren't thinking about this. And just I want you to make this very clear, right? Trump was unique. He was, in many ways, he was a unicorn. He was the only president who had never held government office before. Every other president held government office, either as a member of Congress, a governor, a senator, a general, right? Somethings. And he'd taken some oath to the Constitution, but Trump hadn't. In order for the framers of the 14th Amendment to even think about this, this is a fact pattern. A person who elected president, never before taken any other office, alleged to engage in insurrection, and then sought re-election. That is the fact pattern you have to deal with. Did anyone possibly think of that? Of course not. Of course not. It's preposterous. Again, this is our world. This is actually where we're living. But this was not on the minds. Maybe they thought about Jefferson Davis, but Jeff Davis was a senator. He took an oath. He was covered, right? Jeff Davis was a senator. He was covered. This would be like, if Cornelius Vanderbilt ran for president, resigned, became president of the Confederacy, then ran for re-election to the presidency after the war. That's the analogy. Okay, so we put our amicus brief in, and then we did something else. So maybe my lack of humility comes through this one. We actually filed a leave for argument time at the Supreme Court. We had a reason for doing it. So as Mike might attest, when you're an amicus, you have limited space to file briefs. But one way you get more words is to file another brief. And we've done this before. It's not a secret. We filed motions for leave to participate in oral argument that are effectively reply briefs to the parties. There's no rule against it. Judge can deny leave, but they'll read it. So, I thought there was a very low chance this might be granted, but we want to point out that the lawyers for Trump were not making all the arguments they could be making. What else is new? And that the court should have a full representation on this issue. We did not have consent. It was denied. I was not surprised. I was hoping that there might be some interest, but whatever. Okay. So then we get to the Supreme Court, right? Once again, Trump is at the Supreme Court. I feel like he has so many cases here, I've lost count. We have the immunity. We have the Florida documents case. We have the Georgia one. There are just so many Trump issues at the court. I can't keep track. But something other happened. The New York Times, which ran a profile of Seth last time, ran another one about him. And the headline's great. It says, "A legal outsider, an offbeat theory, and the fate of the election." That's awesome, right? When the Supreme Court considers whether Trump is barred, a professor's scholarship, once relegated to the fringes, will take center stage, whereas we're always fringe. This is me and Seth at the Supreme Court. We're having very fun. We're talking about the Constitution. We're looking away to the Capitol. And by the way, the last 4 years have not been good to me. This is before and after Trump. But we've kept very busy. So both Seth and I were in the courtroom for oral argument. It was a very memorable occasion. I want to walk through a little bit of what happened there. There were some questions about whether the president's in office for the United States. Justice Kagan had one. She says, look, let's just adopt a sensible rule. Forget the text. What's sensible? Well, a lot of you are judges. What's common sense to this person is not common sense to that person. That's not how we judge. Maybe that's how you judge. That's not how I would be a judge. But then Justice Gorsuch came in. And look, I knock on Gorsuch a lot. His stuff. When Gorsuch is wrong, he's wrong. Bostock, McGirt, and so on. But when he's right, he's on fire, right? It's the guy blows hot and cold, right? He's either on or off. There's no middle. Gorsuch is either 0 or 10, right? He's mostly more 10s than 0s, but he drops some eggs every now and then. So Gorsuch says, so maybe the Constitution to us today, to a lay reader, might look a little odd in distinguishing between an officer of the United States and an office under the United States. But maybe that's how it works. And this is our position in a nutshell. Text has a meaning regardless of its consequences. This provision was adopted for a very different circumstance. Trying to map it onto January 6th does not yield the results people want, but that's what it yields. And then Justice Jackson, my new best friend, was super originalist that day. She was talking about the history of the 14th Amendment, saying that there's no reason to include the presidency. And she's exactly right. So how do things line up? So Kagan is with my friends Will Bode and Mike Paulson. Gorsuch was with Blackmun and Tillman 100%. And in fact, Kurt Lash, as Professor Richmond, a dear friend, he was with Justice Jackson. Bode and Paulson is all about sense, common sense, straightforward. If you actually go through the paper, which I don't recommend you do, they use the word common sense over and over and over again, right? Again, when lawyers say common sense, it means they don't have an actual argument. They're appealing to something else that's not there. Talk about a secret code. This is their secret code, common sense. I've not seen this code of sense. I'm sure it exists somewhere. But I think Gorsuch gets things exactly right. All right. Perhaps the highlight for me, though, was Justice Sotomayor. During the arguments, she was sort of making fun of the officer argument. And she said, how can it be that only the president's not covered? Isn't it a gerrymandered rule that we made this argument up to exclude Trump? And the lawyer for Trump said, well, it's not gerrymandered. There's no nefarious intent. And so she says, well, I know you didn't make it up, but I know some scholars have been discussing it. Some scholars. That's me and Seth. So I got trash talked by Sotomayor at the Supreme Court. Look, I'm cool with that, right? That's good. It's like Voldemort. They won't say our names. They call us some scholars. But that's where we are. But in fairness, here's me with Mike and Will. We are still some more scholars. Okay, so we argue. The case is argued. And look, at the argument, it becomes very clear to me that Trump is going to win, right? The only question is, how will Trump win? During the argument, a common theme was that we can't have a patchwork quilt where, for the presidential ballot, Florida has one set of rules, Colorado has another, New Jersey has another, and so on, right? For this federal office, there has to be a uniform national rule. Okay? Kagan said that, Sotomayor said that. Even the court's liberals were uncomfortable with this Ivy League fantasy. So the case is sitting for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Like, what's taking so long? We have an election coming up. Super Tuesday. But then on the Sunday before Super Tuesday, the court says, there'll be opinions tomorrow. And they never do it like that short notice. So on Monday, the Monday before Super Tuesday, a PDF magically appears on the website. There's no court session. They don't announce it from the bench. They just put a PDF on the website. That's how justice is done today, right? PDF. And the court says the judgment of the lower court is reversed. The vote was 9-0. Unanimous. They didn't all agree on much, but they agreed that this Ivy League fantasy must come to an end. We all have to wake up, pinch yourself, it's over. Trump can stand the ballot. The why, though, was where they fractured, depending how you count, 6-3 or 5-4. Okay, so the majority opinion was what's called per curiam by the court, meaning we don't know who wrote it, but John Roberts wrote it. He has a very distinctive style, and his style is to say as little as possible in as many words, right? Where he doesn't actually make sense. He says lots of things that kind of sound nice, but there's no actual law being created. If you kind of read through the lines, there's a couple of themes that to think about, right? First, he cites Chief Justice Chase, Griffin's case, not Roger Taney. He cites Chase, saying, look, you need to have procedures to decide who's disqualified. And those procedures cannot come from the states, right? The states can disqualify their own people, but they can't disqualify federal candidates. And any legislation that's passed must satisfy a test from Section 5, what's called the Bernie v. Flores test, congruence and proportionality. Not important now, but this legislation must be targeted to a specific evil, right? You can't just do any sort of law. What's the upshot of that argument? Roberts says no law on the books today disqualifies someone under Section 3, so Trump stays in the ballot. The court didn't say whether the president was an officer of or under. They just didn't touch the issue. They didn't say there was an insurrection. They picked the most circuitous way of resolving this issue humanly possible. All right, that was the first vote. The second vote came from Justice Barrett, who mostly agreed with the majority, but said, I wouldn't decide this Section 5 issue. It's enough to say Congress must act. And the dissenters was Sotomayor, they weren't really dissenters, partial dissent, kind of. It was Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson said, well, the court should decide less, right? Don't talk about what you need to have, just talk about what legislation you require, and there's no such law in the books. The difference between the majority and the dissent was like this much. They disagreed on very little. There's a lot of just noise, right, frankly. I think this was kind of like, we're going to grit our teeth and rule for Trump. We're going to just dissent to just make people think that, you know, we're down for the cause, right? There just wasn't much in the dissent that really mattered. This could have been a 9-0 opinion. In fact, the majority could have kept it 9-0 if they didn't want to. Roberts, I think, was trying to prevent the chaos. The chaos, Josh. So this was a 9-0 case. So is this the end of Section 3? No, we're not done. Not even close. Let's assume that, if Trump loses, it's over, right? If Trump loses the election, he's done. He'll probably go to jail, probably. And I don't think he'll be old enough to run in 2028, if my math is right. Okay. So if Trump loses, we're done. If Trump wins, it's going to get weird. Really, really weird. And let me just lay out this chronology. When the electors vote, they send their votes to Washington. And on January 6th of 2025, yes, January 6th, that date again, what's going to happen? We'll have a joint session of Congress in which they count the electoral votes. Okay. They can object to electoral votes. There's a statute called the Electoral Count Act, which says if a vote is not regularly given, the vote can be rejected. What does that mean? If there's a majority of Democrats in both houses of Congress, they can reject every single vote for Trump because he's an insurrectionist. The court punted on deciding the issue, leaving it to Congress. So again, if let's say that both houses are solid Democrat, will they be able to resist the temptation of making Joe Biden a two-term president? That's a political judgment. I don't know. That's not for me to decide. But if they try it, I don't think there's an appeal to the Supreme Court from the joint session of Congress. You want to see an actual insurrection? Do that. Stop the steal, right? Remember that? This is an actual coup if they try that. Doesn't end there. Let's say that cooler heads prevail in Congress and that Trump is then inaugurated on January 20th. Then he does something. He signs an executive order. He issues a pardon. He issues a military order. Someone will go. He will fire people. He fires someone. You're fired, right? He fires someone. Guess what happens? The person who's fired says, "You can't fire me. You're not really the president." Ooh, you're not the president. You're an insurrectionist. You're a fake office holder. You're a guy with a podium. You're not really the president. Take that seal down. At that point, the courts will have to decide: is Trump actually the president? Like, who's the real pope, right? Is he actually the president? And at that point, the court will probably say, "Go away. We don't want to deal with this stuff. This is a political question, something else." But the court's punt leaves this issue lingering for the next, 10 months or so. So the upshot of all this is the Ivy League fantasy is perhaps over, but we're just sort of this days in the aftermath. So we can be sort of calm now. This issue will likely come back to the forefront. All right. I am just about at time where they asked me to wrap up. Happy to take your questions, and thank you so much. Okay, what questions do we have?
Anybody feeling brave?
Fortune favors the brave, is what Tom Brady told me. Nothing?
You might turn the camera off.
I can do that. My goodness. All right.
Lots of judges in here.
All right.